In the first scene, a teen called Reese is in a cramped room with dozens of telephones along the walls. One of them, marked with a sticky note, starts ringing suddenly. A pre-recorded message congratulates Reese on a royal flush as she answers the phone. As she struggles to make sense of the situation, more and more phones begin to ring, each with the identical message. Suddenly, the room is flooded with water that is gushing out of the phones. At that moment, Reese looks up and notices a toilet that has been permanently affixed to the ceiling. She uses the telephones while she climbs the wall, having realized that she needs to flush the toilet. She tries to flush the toilet, but she can't seem to find the handle. Fearing that she may drown if she does nothing, Reese composes herself and dials the number written on the sticky note. Fortunately, Reese has an idea, and despite the little time available, she swims back down and uses a phone. Her cunning strategy pays well, as the lost toilet handle is located in a hidden compartment of the phone. Fast as lightning, Reese climbs back up and replaces the toilet's handle. She saves herself by flushing the toilet, which removes all the water from the room. Only a few seconds later did I realize that it was all a simulation. When Reese removes her virtual reality (VR) headset, she finds herself in the midst of other VR users and professional players in an esports center. Chris, her single father, is waiting for her when she gets home, and the two of them eat together. Given that Reese lost her mother at an early age, their closeness is understandable. Light in the room suddenly flickers and short circuits. Then, we see a montage of the city's various electrical outputs being destroyed in the same way. Everything that uses electricity is exploding for no apparent cause. Chris, safe at home, shrugs it off as just another power outage in the city and moves on with his day. In contrast, Reese has no way of communicating with the rest of the world since she has no reception. Reese's computer system crashes and burns as a result of the persistent short circuits. She extinguishes the fire, but her PC is beyond repair. Chris sets a lamp and tells his daughter that she should put down her phone because the blackout was a welcome distraction. They look at some old images on her iPad and talk about when Reese's mom was still living. They both start dozing off on the couch quite quickly. Reese wakes up in the middle of the night to investigate a mysterious noise coming from their warehouse. She sneaks out of the home with a lantern in hand and heads into the warehouse to avoid waking up her father. When she gets there, she reads a book with the title RADIOFLAH, which is really another name for an EMP. As Reese explores the space, we learn that it belonged to her grandfather, Frank's, before he moved to the mountains. A bit later, Reese pulls down the fabric blanket on the table, revealing a deconstructed radio station. She expertly puts the pieces together and successfully connects the radio in the hopes of receiving answers from Frank. She activates the gadget, dials her grandfather's number, and waits a few seconds for a response. Frank, it turns out, is just as worried about the power outage, which he describes as apocalyptic. He claims that the inexplicable blackout has affected nearly the whole western United States. The possibility of electromagnetic pulse attacks is raised as a possible explanation, in his opinion. And then Frank asks for Chris, only to find out that Chris is fast sleeping. Since their time is limited, he gives Reese orders to have him call him on the radio early the next day. He urges the father and daughter to leave their house and come to the mountains with him, where he has lots of food and water stored. Just before hanging up, Frank shows Reese where to get a map and a portable radio that would come in handy later. However, the radio will only function if they are within a 5-mile radius of Frank. Everything points to the fact that he has been planning for this for a long time. Reese complies, and the next morning she breaks the news to her father. Chris first refuses to go to Frank's residence, stating that he is a madman, but after his daughter's persistent pleading, he agrees to at least contact the elderly guy. Quickly after, Reese initiates the radio broadcast as he and the other man make their way to the warehouse. Chris and Frank start talking after she departs. In the beginning, the elderly guy begins to tell the reason for the blackout. He discloses that an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, is to blame for all that has happened so far, and that the whole United States is in for a period of turmoil and anarchy as a result. He says that in 3 days' time resources will be severely limited, making life in the mountains with him the only viable alternative. After hearing this, Chris is persuaded and decides to leave right away. After waiting for the situation to deteriorate, he and Reese begin packing their stuff. Due to the protracted blackout, tensions between police and people have reached a boiling point. The cause of this and its eventual resolution are mysteries. On the other hand, Chris and Reese get in their car and begin driving. They stop at the one grocery in town that is open to stock up on food and water before continuing on. But when they see widespread violence among the populace over basic necessities like food and water, they swiftly withdraw. Thousands of additional individuals are pictured leaving the city as they depart the building. The following scene shows the father and daughter having to wait on a bridge since an accident has closed the road. In this scene, Reese sees a woman who appears to have died. The tension on the bridge finally reaches a breaking point a few hours later when an impatient driver slams into another car. Now that they can go back to their car, Chris and Reese make haste to continue on their way. After waking up later that night, Reese realizes that they have gone past the crossroads and are now heading in the wrong direction. Chris's attention is briefly diverted away from the road as a result of this. The brief second proves expensive as he loses control of the vehicle and smashes it into the surrounding trees. When Reese's father wakes her up the following morning, he is relieved to find that she is unharmed. Chris, however, appears to have hit his head and is slightly bleeding. The two then decide to take the shorter route of following a nearby river to reach Frank's location. Frank is getting anxious about the pair because they were supposed to show up yesterday. Chris is having trouble getting about, so Reese advises taking it easy for a bit. They visit a waterfall to replenish their water supply. Reese sees that her dad has a major cut on his arm and a nasty bruise on his back. Despite Chris's assurances that he'll be alright, she rushes to tend his wounds. They continued on with their trek after a time, but Chris was getting weaker by the minute and soon passed out. He tells his daughter to dial 911 before he passes out. Therefore, without delay, Reese races into the forest, where she luckily comes across a barn house and a farmer named Glenn. As soon as he spotted the distraught teen, he sprung into action, driving Chris back to his house. Chris does not regain consciousness and quits breathing despite all medical efforts. The loss of her lone parent has left Reese distraught and sad. She and Glenn pay their respects the same night, and then bury him in the field. The following day, Glenn makes up his mind to drive Reese to her grandfather's house in his trailer. Frank, however, gets restless waiting and sets off to find Chris and Reese on his own. A piece of bloodied fabric on the floor next to the car is the only evidence he finds a few hours later. After finding the path, Frank arrives at the property where Reese had been hiding. When he checks to see if anyone is home, he is shocked to see blood on the couch. He enters the building suspiciously and begins to look around. Since he has come up empty, he examines Glenn's picture carefully before leaving. As he leaves, he sees Chris's clothes, the shovel, and the grave. Even though Frank has learned that Chris has passed away, he can't afford to mourn because his missing granddaughter, Reese, is also his responsibility. Meanwhile, Glenn sees a man on the roadside who appears to be in need of assistance. He warns Reese to hide in the trailer's rear for her own protection, assuming the stranger has sinister intentions. After Glenn's greatest nightmare was realized, the guy pulled a pistol and shot him to death. Then, with Reese still inside the trailer, the anonymous man gets into his car and drives off. A bit later, he pulls up to a garage and breaks into the back of a fuel truck to help himself to some gas. Suddenly, a hunter fires at the guy, killing him, and Reese takes this as his cue to make a break for it. The same hunter who put the sack over her head later captures her. Upon opening her eyes, Reese is confronted by a mysterious elderly lady who demands payment for trespassing on her land. In the meantime, Frank comes upon Glenn's body and realizes he is the man in the picture. That makes him concerned for Reese even more, so he keeps looking for solutions. While over dinner, though, the elderly lady does introduce Reese to her loved ones. Billy, the hunter from earlier, is her son, and her grandson, Quinn, is timid and has emotional issues. There seems to be no rhyme or reason to Billy's beatings, and he frequently shames and belittles his kid. After everyone has been introduced, Reese will recount the sequence of events that led up to her arrival. She insists that she has to travel to her grandfather as soon as possible, and that she is unable to stay any longer. But the elderly lady has no compassion for her and won't let her go. She makes her sleep in the attic instead. Reese has nowhere else to go, so he goes up to the attic, but he doesn't plan to spend the night. While everyone is sound sleeping, she makes her way to the front door in an attempt to leave. When she tries to unlock the door, the elderly woman hears and sends Billy in pursuit. The adolescent is chased desperately, but the intimidating hunter manages to capture him and bring him back home. Reese comes to while being hung from a tree, bound inside a sack. A big bear appears at that moment, trying to rip open the sack. The adolescent looks to be dead on arrival, but Billy arrives just in time to kill the bear. As it turns out, Reese was really a ploy to attract the massive beast closer to the humans. After the intense meeting, Billy locks her up for a week in a cramped storage room. One day, though, he takes her out and the grandmother attempts to persuade them both to remain and have a family. Reese, though, replies that she'd rather be safe within the warehouse than in the company of such psychopaths. Angry woman gets her wish as she orders Reese to be tossed back into the storage area. She has her wrists and feet restrained this time. To free herself, Reese finally manages to sever the rope from her hands. Unfortunately, she is stuck and cannot think of a way out. The thought of a pan comes to her just as she spots Quinn peering at her. Reese figures out that he feels sorry for her and uses this knowledge to her advantage. She begins pressuring him to assist her, and Quinn, exhausted by his grandmother's and father's continual abuse, reluctantly complies. After he lets her out of the storage room, the two of them immediately leave the complex and run into the night. When Billy wakes up the next morning, he learns that they have both run away. He tracks their movements by broken branches and footfalls and eventually catches up to them. However, far from the complex, Quinn and Reese form a close friendship while eating berries. A little while later, they come to a precipice where Quinn comes dangerously close to falling to his death before being rescued by Reese. The group eventually comes across a wood that serves as a bridge, which they cautiously cross. Billy suddenly notices them from a distance and fires a shot that fortunately misses its target. The kids take off fleeing in terror, and eventually reach a little body of water where they may take refuge. They dive under the ocean after realizing they can't outrun Billy. As soon as the hunter comes across them, Reese and Quinn get out of the water and run in the other way. But Billy, being a seasoned hunter, sees them sneak up on him again from behind, and he begins to follow them. When he finally comes up to them, Quinn challenges him while Reese takes cover behind a rock. As they struggle, Billy's gun falls in front of Reese, but she is hesitant to use it. Reese first has the courage to pick up the gun, but after realizing that Quinn would be beaten to death if she does nothing, she changes her mind. She takes direct aim at Billy and kills him with a single, well-placed shot. However, it turns out that her grandfather, Frank, was the one who pulled the trigger and saved the teens. After hearing the gunfire, he made his way there. Having been relieved, Reese comes to her grandfather and gives him a bear embrace, tears streaming down her face. Flash forward to the future, when Quinn and Reese are both living with Frank and participating in family outings. The aftermath of the EMP has left the globe in shambles, but here in the mountains, you'll find everything you need to stay alive. At the film's conclusion, Quinn opens Reese's laptop and sees a number of messages from her pals, all of which suggest that the power outage situation is on its way to resolution.